What's poppin', Peacemakers? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is going to be a breakdown for the Season 2 finale of Peacemaker, an incredibly emotional finale that sets up some really exciting stuff for the future of the growing DCEU, especially the upcoming Superman sequel, Man of Tomorrow. We're going to dive into exactly how this episode serves as an important milestone in DCU history, so if you have not seen this episode yet, please know that there are heavy spoilers ahead. You have been warned. So I'm going to go ahead and start this video off by talking about the ending because, let's be real, that's where most of the questions people have lies. With the biggest question being, exactly how does this ending tie into Superman 2 like James Gunn has been teasing for a little bit now? Well, the answer to this lies in Rick Flag Sr.'s diabolical plan to shove all of the dangerous metahumans in America into an alternate dimension hospitable for human life. Because after sacrificing multiple Argus agents to locate such a dimension across the multiverse, Argus finally finds one such world and decides to name the entire planet Salvation, which is an insanely important detail that points to the potential coming of one of Superman's greatest mortal enemies, Darkseid. We have seen a similar scenario happen in the pages of DC Comics' Salvation Run series from writer Bill Willingham, the creator of one of my personal favorite comic book series of all time, Fables, a series that of course became the basis for the popular Wolf Among Us video game series from Telltale Games. The Salvation Run series ran from November 2007 to June 2008 and introduced the very hostile alien world known as Salvation. Also known as Cygnus 4019 or Prison Planet or the Hell Planet, the planet Salvation would be used by the US government in order to remove all of the dangerous metahumans out of America once and for all, with Rick Flag also spearheading the operation in the comics, much like we see him do in this Peacemaker Season 2 finale. Literally from page 1 of the very first issue of Salvation Run, you can see how much disdain Rick Flag has for all metahumans that have put humanity at risk time and time again, telling Amanda Waller that sending all of these superhuman prisoners to an uninhabited planet and then making them all fend for themselves Hunger Games style was the morally right thing to do, especially since a lot of these dangerous supervillains have a habit of escaping their various prisons and rehab facilities over and over again. So Planet Salvation was pretty much pitched to the government as this opportunity for containment and rehabilitation on a paradise of a planet. But little did they know that the closest thing to paradise there is in this world is wearing a shirt from the Heavy Spoilers merch store. We've got a new Grid Racer shirt inspired by the upcoming Tron Ares, a fun chainsaw shirt for fans of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, as well as 2 incredible shirts inspired by both Gen V and The Boys. We've got all that and so much more over at the store, so hit up heavyspoilers.shop today. It's a great way to support the channel. However, even though the US government assumed that this new planet was completely harmless during their initial scans and surveys, it turns out that the planet Salvation is filled with all sorts of dangers, like violent alien creatures, shifting terrain, and super dangerous weather that the hundreds of superhuman prisoners thrown on the planet had to deal with while simultaneously trying to kill each other. Because let's face it, if you put a bunch of supervillains together on a planet, they're not going to get along. The villains then begin to splinter into rival camps led by Lex Luthor, the Joker, and Vandal Savage, with each of them struggling for dominance while battling both the environment and each other. However, unknown to both the prisoners and the US government, Salvation was secretly tied to Darkseid and the New Gods of Apocalypse. Desaad, one of Darkseid's lieutenants, routinely used Planet Salvation as a testing ground for training Apocalypse's army of parademons and testing out their various weaponry. This being said, the introduction of Planet Salvation to the DCU appears to point towards James Gunn wanting to tackle a live-action adaptation of this Salvation Run event, with Peacemaker being the first of many prisoners sent to this alternate hellscape of a reality. And while Chris being sent to this alternate dimension is clearly Rick Flag's way of punishing him for murdering his son, he actually really is the best person to act as a guinea pig to explore and test this alien environment. Because much like we see referenced in this episode, Peacemaker still has Argus technology implanted in his head from when he was a part of Amanda Waller's Task Force X. And much like we've seen in projects like the Suicide Squad and Creature Commandos, this technology is able to track the vital signs of everybody on the Suicide Squad. So all Argus really has to do is open the portal to Peacemaker's new world in order to establish a connection with Peacemaker's chip to see if he's alive and how being on the planet is affecting his body over time, without having to be that close to Peacemaker at all. And eventually, after collecting enough data of Peacemaker's vital signs on this planet, Rick Flag will undoubtedly take this data to the US government in order for them to fully co-sign and fund the forced deportation of all arrested metahumans. Now, this is going to be super important for the Superman sequel Man of Tomorrow, because that sequel will likely see both Superman and Lex Luthor tricked into this alternate dimension by Rick Flag and Argus, specifically because of both of their roles in the events of the 2025 Superman film. Because even though Superman did technically save the day from Lex Luthor's black hole, he still very much violated international law when he stopped the nation of Baravia from invading a neighboring nation. Same with Justice Gang members Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, and Metamorpho. So I can definitely see the US government sending all four of them there for their unsanctioned intervention that could have put America in a tough geopolitical position with their allies. I can also see Rick Flag throwing his old buddies on the Creature Commandos under the bus as well, especially because of how the Bride of Frankenstein along with the Creature Commandos were responsible for killing Princess Alana Rostovic, the leader of the United States ally nation of Pokolistan, and a romantic interest of Rick Flag's. Rick Flag Sr. tried his absolute best to prove that the princess was not going to trigger a prophesied World War III, but would ultimately end up having his back broken by Princess Alana's hired metahuman mercenary Clayface, waking up only after Princess Alana was assassinated by the Bride of Frankenstein. And even though Princess Alana was clearly going to bring mass suffering to the world in her quest for total world domination, Rick Flag Sr. himself never saw proof of that, as he was unconscious in the ER when the Creature Commandos discovered video evidence of Princess Alana's betrayal. So Rick Flag Sr., being the petty bitch that he is, would totally throw the Creature Commandos onto Planet Salvation as well for taking the life of his love interest. And with DC Studios also having a Clayface movie in development starring Tom Rhys-Harries, I can totally see that movie ending with a petty Rick Flag capturing Clayface and sending him to Planet Salvation 2. And while yes, we do know that Rick Flag currently has a working relationship with Lex Luthor when it comes to interdimensional science, Rick Flag knows damn well that Lex Luthor is too dangerous to be trusted. And much like how Rick Flag manipulated and used Amelia Harcourt and Sasha Bordeaux, he's currently doing the same with Lex Luthor, using Lex and his team before he ultimately betrays Lex and throws him into the portal with the rest of the villains to live in a dimension filled with the very metahumans that he despises. Because even though Lex Luthor considers himself to be above metahumans, he doesn't realize that he, like Peacemaker, is also a bit of an enhanced individual himself. While he doesn't have any superpowers, Lex's terrifyingly advanced intellect gives him the potential to be just as dangerous as a metahuman could ever be. So even though Rick Flag Sr. has temporarily appeased Lex Luthor by allowing him to be moved from Belle-Reeved metahuman prison to the regular human prison over at Van Kull Maximum Security Penitentiary, I do not believe that Rick Flag intends to keep Lex Luthor separated from metahumans for long. Because it seems like Rick Flag Sr. is transforming into the proper human supremacist that Lex Luthor believes that he is. Because the difference is Rick Flag Sr. isn't a metahuman or a super genius. Dude is just a soldier who had his life radically changed by the metahuman affairs of Argus time and time again. And now he's tired of any and all unnatural threats to humankind, especially crazy-ass super geniuses like Lex Luthor. So I believe that it will be because of Lex's perceived superiority to the average man that he'll be thrown into this prison dimension with the rest of the DCU's most feared super threats. This being said, it seems like there is a big chance that Man of Tomorrow could be a story about how Clark Kent and Lex Luthor are forced to work together to survive from both the prisoners and wildlife of Planet Salvation, while also dealing with their clashing ideologies of what it truly means to be a Man of Tomorrow. Does the Man of Tomorrow accept the growing diversity of the world and find hope in that like Superman does? Or is the true Man of Tomorrow a human with pure blood that fights to protect the peace for other perceived pure-blooded people like Lex wants? Peacemaker Season 2 is truly the perfect DCU narrative to introduce such a concept like Planet Salvation, because it's very much a reflection and extension of the intolerance that we saw prevalent on the alternate universe of Earth X. Like Leota and Judo Master reflecting on how the Nazi universe wasn't all that different from their own was 100% true, to the point that humanity's intolerance is what's forging the path forward for the future of the DCU, much like it will for the Mutant Saga after Secret Wars over at Marvel Studios, because that's pretty much what the X-Men's whole deal is all about. But obviously, the most exciting part of Planet Salvation's inclusion in the DCU narrative is its connections with the new gods of Apocalypse. Because if James Gunn is intending on fully adapting the Salvation Run storyline, then over the course of Man of Tomorrow, Superman and Lex will have to deal with a horde of parademons, much like Lex, Joker, Vandal Savage, and the other superhumans on the prison planet do in the comics. And such a confrontation would undoubtedly catch the attention of Darkseid himself, which could lead to Darkseid being interested in planet Earth, likely assuming that Earth is filled with powerful metahuman warriors like Planet Salvation was. But the main point here is, Peacemaker being stranded on Planet Salvation progresses the DCU's overall narrative of gods and monsters by teasing the coming of the new gods of Apocalypse through the mass deportation and imprisonment of society's metahuman monsters. And I'm excited to see where things head from here. But let's get on to the episode, shall we? Episode 8, titled Full Nelson, opens to the sounds of Someone Special by Hardcore Superstar. The name Full Nelson is fitting for a show like Peacemaker, as it refers to both the band Nelson, who we learned performed on a boat party a month prior to the events of the show, while also of course being the name of a wrestling move, something that wrestler John Cena knows all about. But yeah, the episode opens inside of a Big Belly Burger, a restaurant that we see advertised on a billboard in the 2025 Superman movie. It was also referenced a few times in the old DCEU continuity, with Big Belly Burger playing a big role in how Jaime Reyes acquires the Blue Beetle Scarab in the 2023 Blue Beetle movie. Chris and Harcourt have themselves some burgers and shots while talking about how Adebayo aired out all of Argus and Amanda Waller's dirty laundry at the end of season 1. They eventually leave the restaurant before Harcourt compares a bearded cat collar to the Looney Tunes character Yosemite Sam. And honestly, she's right. And while Harcourt continues to confront the man and make claims about his mother's promiscuity, we can see that this dude is wearing a shirt for the Evergreen Prawns football team. In an earlier episode, when Argus attempts to arrest Peacemaker at the park, we can see Argus agent Klein rocking an Evergreen's Prawns hat as well. The Evergreen Prawns is also mentioned a little bit later on in the episode when Economos is trying to distract the Argus agents.
Did you watch the Prawns game last night?
There was no game last night.
Fuck you, man!
Peacemaker prevents Harcourt from making a Yosemite Sam hat out of the cat collar's anal cavity before heading down to the port of Evergreen, where Chris immediately spots a party boat rock cruise hosting the rock band Nelson and convinces Harcourt to go with him. Later on in the episode, when Harcourt finds the ticket to the concert that Chris saved inside of his mirror, we can see that the date and time of their Nelson date was 7 p.m. on May 22nd, and that they both had to fork over $65 in order to hear Nelson perform their song To Get Back to You from their 2010 album Lightning Strikes Twice. Then, after the intro, we're brought 1 month to the future to the events of the modern day, where a depressed Peacemaker is wasting away in a cell at the Evergreen Correction Center. And after watching his brother almost die in front of his eyes for the second time, Chris begins to believe himself to be the Angel of Death, leading him to reject a visit from his 11th Street Kids fam. Chris calling himself an Angel of Death is a reference to the various angels of death from religious texts, like when an angel of death killed a bunch of firstborn babies in the book of Exodus chapter 12 in the Bible, as well as the Islamic figure Azrael. Then the episode shifts to Argus as they begin to explore the many rooms inside of the Quantum Unfolding Chamber, or QUC. Rick Flag has purposely kept his true intentions for the multiverse close to his vest, but he does mention to Stephen Blackheart's Sidney Apperson that everything that they talked about is gonna come to fruition when Argus finally locates a dimension condition suitable for human life. This line is super important because it shows how Rick Flag's plans for planet salvation likely were inspired by his very conversations with Lex Luthor, showing that their relationship has begun to inspire Rick to be as ruthless and intolerant as Superman's greatest nemesis. But anyways, as the Argus agents walk through the QUC, they begin to assign numbers to every dimensional door that they find, which could be the start to how the DCU begins to assign the numbers of other Earths in the future. But instead of saying door 1 and door 2, they'll be saying stuff like Earth 1 and Earth 2 and shit like that, just like they do in the comics. And to pass the time, Agent Flurry begins telling everybody about how Agent Klein threw up on a stripper that Flurry compares to the Godzilla franchise monster Mothra, claiming that Klein had the eyes of the Looney Tunes skunk Pepe Le Pew when he first saw that stripper for the first time. And for those of you who don't already know, Looney Tunes is going to get a lot of love in the DCU in the future because Looney Tunes is a Warner Brothers property, just like DC Comics is. Monitoring the Argus agents alongside Rick Flag and Sidney Happerson are former Luthor Corp employees Otis Berg and Amanda McCoy, played by Terrence Rosemore and Natasha Halevi respectively, just like the characters were in James Gunn's Superman movie. The character of Otis Berg was originally created for the first Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve, while Amanda McCoy was introduced as a LexCorp employee in the pages of 1987's Superman #2. Comic book Amanda McCoy was a super smart scientist and knew how to build herself a mean computer. She was so good, in fact, that she was even able to make the connection that Superman was actually goofy-ass journalist Clark Kent. But Lex Luthor thought that idea was so crazy that he would fire her ass. But anyways, when Argus discovers that door 22 is indeed open, they discover a universe covered in lollipops and candy canes. And while the universe appears to be hospitable for life at first glance, Brandon Stanley's Agent Klein quickly learns that it is indeed not hospitable at all, as that universe is home to tiny, murderous imps that will hump your hazmat suit before feasting on your flesh. These appear to be the very same imps that Earth X, Augie, and Keith were talking about while having a beer with Chris at the end of episode 1.
Crispers rummaging around the Munchkin dimension 8 doors down.
They're not munchkins, Dad. They're imps.
After the trauma of Agent Klein's death, Economos begins to suspect that Argus isn't actually using the QUC for the benefit of mankind, because that's never really been Argus's MO. And he also suspects that whatever they're planning is going to end up triggering the next Metropolis incident, referencing the black hole event from the 2025 Superman movie. Then the episode shifts to Leota arriving at Adrian's house in order to secure the money to bail Chris out of prison, because Adrian somehow still has a secret stash of illegal baby powder and millions of dollars that he's procured from various cartels around the country. Not sure how Argus didn't scoop that up when they arrested Peacemaker, but Rick Flag's not doing his job. After Adrian lets Leota in, he sits down to play the 2024 video game Princess Peach Showtime on his Nintendo Switch. We can also see that Leota is rocking a No Justice, No Peace shirt during this scene as well. The slogan No Justice, No Peace of course originated in the early 1980s during protests against police brutality and racial injustice in the United States, gaining prominence after the 1986 killing of Michael Griffith in Howard Beach, New York. It's just the expression of the idea that true social peace cannot exist without justice and accountability for oppression. And after convincing Adrian to risk getting a blood curse by spending his cartel money, they head back out to the jail to bail Chris out. Chris initially tries to refuse getting bailed out, but is quickly reminded that jail ain't some Holiday Inn hotel. However, as soon as Chris gets out, he immediately heads home to grab his homie Eagly, who has been extremely depressed at Peacemaker's absence. But luckily, John was able to lift Eagly's spirits up with food in the meantime, a gesture that Eagly shows appreciation for with a Christian side hug by the end of the episode. And after the 11th Street kids chew out John for just letting Chris leave without tackling his muscly ass to the ground, we get a montage of more Argus explorations into the QUC set to Steel Panther's effing my heart in the ass. During this montage, we see a number of Argus agents risk and or lose their lives exploring a variety of universes, all while Rick Flag and Lex Luthor's team completely disregard all of those sacrifices in the name of results, almost becoming just as apathetic towards human lives as Lex was during the Superman movie. And as we watch these agents endure horror after horror, like this universe of giant skull spider creatures, or this zombie universe set in what looks like colonial America, they come across one of the most interesting rooms of the episode for me, this room containing a giant black hole that almost sucks in Judo Master and the Argus team. Lex Luthor himself also found this particular door interesting, even leaving a note for Rick Flag with the words, "Looks promising, can't wait to see what's next." And while this note is obviously just Lex Luthor expressing further interest in the connection between black holes and interdimensional travel like we saw in the Superman movie, part of me feels like James Gunn might have also left this note on here in order to tease how this particular black hole could play a massive role in the future of the DCU. Because as we saw in the Superman movie, the Superman clone Ultraman was swallowed by the very same black hole that threatened to rip Metropolis and the entire world apart. And while the chances of this black hole from this episode being the same black hole from the Superman movie are slim to none, Lex knowing that the US government has convenient and relatively stable access to a black hole through the QUC could potentially open the door to another problem, the return of Ultraman. Because like I mentioned in a previous Superman video on this channel, although it appears that Ultraman perished inside of this black hole in Superman, in science fiction, falling into a black hole does not necessarily mean the end. In fact, it could also act as a gateway to another universe. And I personally believe that whatever universe Ultraman landed himself into after falling into that black hole will end up becoming the DCU adaptation of Earth 3. The universe where an evil version of the Justice League called the Crime Syndicate rules the world, much like we saw in the 2010 animated Crisis on Two Earths film, as well as episodes 37 and 38 of the Justice League animated series. So this note to me feels like James Gunn is hinting that he has plans for both Lex Luthor and this particular black hole, but only time will tell what those specific plans are. But anyways, after opening door after door, the Argus team finally comes across what they believe to be a safe, habitable planet with food and water, and take a bunch of pictures to show off to the people at the Pentagon, including Secretary of Defense Stephen Mori, played again by James Hiroyuki Liao, after his debut in the Superman movie. During this presentation, Rick mentions how Arkham Asylum in Batman's home turf of Gotham and Belle Reve are not enough to hold metahumans anymore because they keep escaping. And the idea of rounding up metahumans and sending them to another dimension begins to disturb Sasha Bordeaux, being a metahuman herself, which leads her to meet up with Harcourt at Big Belly Burger to express her desire to no longer be a part of Argus. This then leads Harcourt to introduce her to Leota, and the three of them begin discussing plans to start an agency of their own. But since Leota's ex Kia isn't about all that James Bond shit, Leota decides to do the mature thing and say goodbye to her ex so that they can both live the lives that they want without feeling stifled. And my god, did that scene hit me where I live, man, because I have gone through something similar to that and it's hard as hell. Saying goodbye to someone because you guys have two separate paths that you guys want to walk on is extremely hard, and like a lot of people just try to just make things work and end up making each other miserable. So Leota kind of did the right thing, and I kind of wish I acted as mature as she did in this moment. But anyways, after we get a dramatic rendition of We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister, the 11th Street Kids then resolve to try to find Peacemaker by tracking down the Argus chip in his square head. And while John attempts to distract Lex's team from finding out what Sasha and Harcourt are doing on their computers, he ends up calling Allie Jessup the big C word, with actress Bonnie DiCepolo reprising the role of Miss Jessup from Superman as well. They all then meet back up with Chris at the American Star Motel and all express how much he meant to all of their lives. And I have got to give huge props to Danielle Brooks in this scene because my goodness, a sister can act! Touched by the love from his friends, Peacemaker decides to stop being all emo and help Leota, Harcourt, and Sasha found the Checkmate Agency, an offshoot of Task Force X that was introduced in the pages of 1988's Action Comics 598 as an independent peacekeeping force. But while Amanda Waller would end up founding Checkmate in the comics, it would be Amanda Waller's daughter, Leota, that would end up being a core founder in the DCEU. Members of Checkmate in the comics have code names that correspond to black and white chess pieces, with the white chess piece code names being reserved for those involved in intelligence, and the black chess piece code names being reserved for those agents involved in operations. So much like a game of chess, the black and white kings and queens of checkmate are considered the 4 leaders. And in the comics, Sasha Bordeaux herself was a black queen at one point, alongside the villainous Maxwell Lord, who was Black King. But everyone knows that the true Black King of the DCU checkmate is none other than Tim Meadows' Agent Fleury, who, along with Judo Master, has decided to give Argus the finger and join the classic James Gunn slow walk at the end of the episode. But there is one particular thing that I do want to mention real quick about Checkmate's history in the comics. Specifically, how Checkmate was kind of forced to expand the operations to a global level due to the actions of a group called the Cobra Cult. I mentioned this cult briefly in an earlier Peacemaker breakdown this season when I mentioned how the Earth X Peacemaker had snake imagery in his bedroom as well as on his phone case. With our Peacemaker being associated with Checkmate in the main DCU universe, maybe Earth X Peacemaker was part of the Earth X Cobra Cult, kind of acting like the evil version of the Checkmate group. I mean, even though there aren't any confirmed plans for Peacemaker Season 3 just yet, we're obviously going to see the narrative return back to the Nazi universe at some point, especially since it appeared that Keith survived his multiple stab wounds and is looking for revenge against his alternate universe brother. So maybe when we do continue the Earth X narrative, Checkmate has to go against their evil Earth X counterpart in the form of a racist adaptation of the Cobra Cult. Who knows? But do you know what would be even more wild? If it's revealed that Peacemaker has a little Nazi son or daughter after sleeping with alternate universe Harcourt. That would really force Peacemaker to have to head back to Earth X and deal with that whole situation. But hopefully Chris was responsible and put a little silver helmet on the little Peacemaker between his muscly legs. But anyways, with Chris having started an organization of his own and knowing that Harcourt feels the same way about him, his life is looking pretty damn good right now, especially after attending another boat concert with Harcourt, but this time with Foxy Shazam performing the Peacemaker theme song, Oh Lord. But Chris's luck would of course run out when he is kidnapped by Argus and dropped off onto Planet Salvation by Rick Flag Sr., sentencing Chris to a life of exile for murdering his son. And after Peacemaker is dropped off by Argus onto this Planet Salvation, we can actually hear the sounds of screeching alien wildlife in the background, with some of those sounds possibly belonging to the extra-dimensional and extra-predatory lion lizards, like the kind that we see in Salvation Run issue number 2. Or it could even be one of Salvation's many giant snake-like beasts that we see in Salvation Run number 4. Either way, Chris is going to have to learn to survive on a planet made to challenge the armies of the new gods themselves. So I am sure glad that Argus let Chris go to a Foxy Shazam concert one last time before they threw his square head into Jurassic World Apocalypse Edition, because bro is about to have himself a real bad time. But anyways, like always, you guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet, especially at twitch.tv/mastertainment, where I will be streaming video games very soon. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you Peacemakers later. Bye-bye.